Greetings from Jacksonpal Pharmaceuticals Limited, makers of Estradiol Valrate 2 mg as Endonorm EV2 and Lycorate Track Sachet in orange flavor. On behalf of Jacksonpal, I, Dr. Vipin Tyagi, welcoming all to the webinar today on poor endometrium, not an enigma anymore. We thank Dr. Seema Mittal, President, Rewari Obs and Gynae Society, convener and moderator for organizing this webinar, supported by Lalita Memorial Hospital Infertility Center, Rewari. Special thanks to Honorable Dr. Shweta Mittal Gupta, Senior Consultant, Center of IVF and Human Reproduction, Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, New Delhi, for imparting the vast knowledge to all of us. Dr. Shweta is Editor, Indian Fertility Society and Treasurer, AOGD. We thank all the esteemed chairpersons for sparing your valuable time to impart words of wisdom to all. Dr. Archana Verma, Vice President-elect Foxy, Dr. Anita Razoria, HOD from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Hospital, Delhi. She is Chairperson, Reproductive Endocrinology Committee, AOGD, and is now contesting for Chairperson, Food, Drug and Medico-Surgical Equipment Committee in Foxy elections. Dr. Savita Singhal, Senior Professor and Unit Head, PGIMS, Rohtak. We welcoming all chairpersons to webinar today. Welcome panel members, Dr. Nymphia Valecha, Fortis Ridge IVF, Shalimar Bagh, Delhi. Dr. Nisha Agarwal, Medor Hospital, Manesar. Dr. Manju Horchandani, Mulchand Med City, Delhi. Thank you for sparing your valuable time to share the knowledge. We are pleased to have Dr. Mitra Saxena, past President of Rewari Obs and Gynae Society, now contesting for Chairperson, Practical Obstetrics Committee. We are indebted to ICOG for accreditation of 1 point to all attendees of this webinar. Welcome to all attendees present with us today. We hope that you all enjoy the session today. Please note, this webinar is brought to you as knowledge sharing initiative by Jacksonpal Medical Services, and this session is streaming on Facebook Live. The recording will remain on Jacksonpal's YouTube channel for reference and knowledge sharing. During the session, we request the attendees please post your queries by text in the Q&A box, which will be answered at the end of the session. Due to the time constraint, please share your questions during the webinar itself as text. I will now request Dr. Seema Mittal ma'am to kindly initiate the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, Vipin ji. Good evening, Dr. Deepika, and thank you so much for making all the arrangements. I welcome all the participants and the panelists and chairpersons for session, and welcome Dr. Shweta. Sure, you are the scholar I respect the most, and we will shortly be discussing watching the CV of Dr. Shweta. Dr. Shweta Mittal is the senior consultant at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, and the only person I have met who talks about evidence-based practice and who happily shares all her secrets, and she takes up the questions very well. And I was really looking forward to this moment to be with Dr. Shweta. And as you all know, we have started this program of 7 days with 7 scholars, where we get the master planners in infertility. And last discussion we had with Dr. Aba Majumdar on IUI, and today we are discussing poor endometrium. Poor endometrium, as the literature says, that it is only 2.4%, but when we see our patients in practice, every 10th patient is suffering from poor endometrium and implantation failure. And if we know the right things that we have to do, and some evidence we get for all the procedures we are doing, then I think we can justify our patients better. So here we have Dr. Shweta Mittal Gupta from Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, who will be talking about the poor endometrium, the ways to improve it, and in the end, if some questions that are left, we will be discussing in our panel, where we have the panelists Dr. Nymphia, Dr. Nisha, and Dr. Manju, who all are experts in the field of infertility. And as chairperson, we have Dr. Archana Verma, who would be joining shortly. She is the vice president-elect North Zone. We have Dr. Anita Rajoria ma'am, who is the HOD, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Hospital, New Delhi, and ma'am is contesting for Food and Drug Committee for Foxy, and I request everybody to nominate her. We already nominated her to vote for her, and we will have Dr. Mitra Saxena from Rewari, who is contesting for Practical Obstetric Committee, and both are wonderful persons, and they will justify the post they get. So, may I request Dr. Anita, can we have the CV of Dr. Shweta on display, Vipinji? And I will request Dr. Anita ma'am to introduce Dr. Shweta Mittal Gupta.
So can I have the CV?
Yes, it's there.
So the most important introduction I can give her is she's a very, very kind person, a very good friend, a very learned doctor. You know, I first time got to know her when she won a quiz prize. So I was very, very impressed by the knowledge she has. She is senior consultant, Center of IVF and Human Reproduction, Sir Gangaram Hospital. She is editor of Indian Fertility Society Journal. She has been treasurer AOGD this year, 2020. She was credited for first pregnancy from frozen thawed oocyte, North India. She is recipient of Economic Times Award for inspiring obstetrician and gynecologist. And she got IVF and Vigyan Vardhan Award, Foxy Ethicon Traveling Fellowship, and many more credentials to her. She is first fellow National Board Reproductive Medicine. She is peer reviewer of Journal of Assisted Reproduction and Genetics, Journal of Obs and Gynaecology, India. She is a teacher of many fellows, postgraduates, and again I must commit, she's a very learned person. We are looking forward to hear to her. Over to you, dear Shweta.
Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. Thank you, Dr. Seema, Dr. Anita. Without much ado, we'll start the presentation. So it's a difficult task given, saying that thin endometrium is not an enigma. In reality, I think it is. Let's hope that if we can tackle certain issues of thin endometrium, and at the end of our practice, we all realize that there are certain thin endometriums where we really can't do anything and we need to go ahead. So just to begin with, that what is one of the key factors for successful embryo implantation is the presence of a receptive endometrium. So what basically, when we say that this endometrium is very receptive, we are looking at three events which are happening. The first is the proliferation and thickening of the endometrium. Number two, so this is what overtly we look at in the ultrasound, and we say, okay, if these things are in phase, then we know that things are going on well. But what is going on internally is, of course, the synchronization of the microarchitectural changes of the endometrium. And then we need to have presence of certain, proper cytokine environment. We know that like leukemic inhibiting factor is very important when it comes to implantation. So implantation is a very intrinsic process. It's a right dialogue between the seed and the soil. So what we are here to determine today, that is this soil good enough for the seed to be received. So endometrial cycle, we know that we have two phases, the proliferative phase and the secretory phase. So if you're looking at proliferative phase, we are looking at all the effects of rising estrogen, active proliferation, better angiogenesis, and anti-apoptotic factors. After all, it has to receive the embryo. When we are looking at effect of progesterone, we are looking at suppression of the proliferation, induction of cell differentiation. So now there has to be a clear stromal and glandular epithelial cells, a vascular remodeling and infiltration by large number of immune cells from the bone marrow and in the uterine milieu, so as to make this endometrium receptive. So this is a jargon of upregulation and downregulation of all the receptors. So if we can recall this test, which is called endometrial receptivity array, it is basically looking at these kind of genes, and it is looking at for implantation, are the right genes at the right place? Are they present or not? So the whole purpose of endometrial receptivity is for implantation of embryo. Now we are wondering that why are we going into the implantation? We are going into the implantation because when we are looking at implantation failure, we are either looking at deceptive seed or we are looking at defective soil. So when we look at so many causes of implantation failure, one cause which Dr. Seema said is that does this endometrium actually come or fall into the cause of implantation failure? Yes. An excessively thick endometrium or an excessively thin endometrium both can be detrimental to implantation, and that is the reason why out of all these factors what you can see, we do give importance to endometrium because after all it is the right soil which will bring the pregnancy. So coming to thin endometrium, when will we call an endometrium thin? So this is a very, very, a question which it is also has its own debates. But at the height of proliferative phase in an ovulatory cycle, so whatever I say, it is very important with the maximum estrogen exposure. If the endometrium is lower than 7 millimeter, but not showing a triple line, though that is not that important, then it is called a thin endometrium, which might interfere with an optimal implantation. So let me give you an example when I define this. We take a clomiphene cycle or we take a letrozole cycle. We call a girl of PCO. Let's discuss if we are not dealing with IVF. And we see that our follicle is 13 or 14 millimeter and it is not growing well, but she has reached on day 15 or 16. We see that the estrogen is say 100. We do not call it an optimal phase because we have not looked at an 18 millimeter endometrium. So it is very important that when these women are either ovulating or you have made them, ovulating, you see the follicular size. It's only when the follicular size reaches its dominance, that is the time when you can say whether the endometrium is thin or it is not thin. Number two, let's take, for example, a woman who's going through a frozen embryo transfer cycle or a fresh IVF cycle. So in a fresh IVF cycle, we know that the estrogen levels are in thousands, it could be 1200, it could be 1500. At that point of time, if we see that the endometrium is thin on the day of HCG, then yes, we label it as thin endometrium. Third situation is that we are giving estrogen to build up her endometrium for, in an HRT cycle. Even after giving say 8 milligrams, 10 milligrams or 12 milligrams of estrogen for say about 3 weeks, we do not see an optimum endometrium. It remains less than 7 millimeter. Then I will label her as a thin endometrium. So I hope that all the three clinical situations are clear, that when is the point where we will say that this patient has thin endometrium. Please do not prematurely label these patients as thin endometrium unless you have adequately given them the right dose and the right duration of exposure of the treatment which should have been given to call it, a low endometrium. So when we look at thin endometrium, so I never label a woman with just one cycle. I follow her up in 2 or 3 different cycles. I maybe change the regime, I may do that. And it is only then that I start labeling her that yes, you have a suboptimal endometrium. So once I have labeled her, then I start looking into the cause. There would be certain causes which could be right in front of your eyes from the beginning, like Mullerian anomalies. You're dealing with biconjugate uterus, uniconjugate or septate. But I can share my experience that in a biconjugate uterus, sometimes if both the horns are developed well, you may not see a thin endometrium, but yes, in many cases, if there is an unequal development of horns, one horn will show a little better endometrium or both of them can show suboptimal endometrium. In uniconjugate uterus, we see many a times. In septate uterus, yes, you can see a thinner endometrium, but usually even when the septate uterus, you treat them, and a post-septal resection, sometimes you see the fundus is very broad and falsely the ultrasonologist will report them as thick endometrium. Number 2, which I said, poor exposure to estrogen, which could be due to deficiency in the HPO axis. We could be dealing with premature ovarian failures. We could be dealing with anything which can cause, a low endometrium. But more commonly, we find more of thin endometrium which are acquired. Now, when we are looking at endometrium, which is an acquired infection, please be very clear that what are we dealing with? So first of all, have a differentiation. Are we dealing with an infective pathology or are we dealing with a non-infective pathology? So if you're dealing with an infective pathology, then have a differentiation that are we dealing with genital infections which are non-tubercular or they are tubercular. This is very important. Not every thin endometrium which is because of PID or because of endometritis is tubercular. So please have a differentiation, and that is the reason I would say that I will say that a patient has tuberculosis only when I have done a laparoscopy for such patients. I have seen the clinical stigma of genital cocks. Even if it is not there, then if I have a tissue diagnosis or a culture positive or an AFB stain positive, I will label her as tuberculosis. Otherwise, I will label her as a non-tubercular PID. The commonest what we see in our clinical practice over a period of years, we have realized are abortions, post miscarriage, dilatation and curettage which is done, and especially if patient has had a second trimester miscarriage where very enthusiastic or overzealous curettage was done, or a retained placenta where overzealous curettage was done, and repeated miscarriages are the most common indication or the scenario why we find in our practice when we say that these patients have damaged endometrium, intrauterine adhesions causing thin endometrium. Surgical procedure, we have to be very careful when we are doing myomectomies, because about 30% of patients with submucous myomas can have intrauterine adhesions. Nowadays, with increasing cesarean, we also see post-cesareans that the lower segments have been sutured, especially when a secondary, secondary arrest cesarean was done, and it can cause scarring and adhesions. So if you have, I'm not able to change my slide. Okay, so now how do you diagnose it? So the first thing is that what is very easily available in everybody's OPDs are a 2D ultrasound. If you have the luxury of a 3D ultrasound, please make use of it, because I always make use of a 3D ultrasound when I'm dealing with thin endometriums, because they give me a better architecture. If you can see the pictures below, I have demarcated how a normal uterus will look like, how you can outline the whole uterine cavity and the volume, and it is one of the best methods to check for any intrauterine adhesions, and that is the way to go about it. You can check endometrial volume and you can see the Doppler dose. Now, when I'm talking about a thin endometrium, how do you measure it? Always a transvaginal scan. Always examine her in the middle of the cycle which I've already said, when the appropriate follicle has reached in an ovulatory cycle, or when adequate estrogen has been given to prime the endometrium. The probe frequency has to be between 5 to 8 megahertz. Do it in the sagittal section. If you can see, the whole cervical canal, the whole endometrial canal should be seen in a similar plane. And then you go to the thickest part of the endometrium, slightly below the fundus, and you measure from one stratum basalis to the other stratum basalis. That is the junction between the myometrium and the endometrium. So, a very small changes in the measurement can actually change the endometrial thickness by 1 to 2 millimeters. And it has invariably happened even with me that I measure the same endometrium 3 times. Sometimes my mind says, oh, I want to do the embryo transfer in this patient, and I will land up reporting this endometrium as 7 millimeter. If it's in my mind sometimes that I don't want to do this embryo transfer, I will, stretch that, thickness a little bit less, and I will say, oh, it's 6.5. And it happens with all of us that we measure endometrium 3 times, and 3 times we can find a difference of 1 millimeter. And so the intra-observer variation is there, and we definitely have inter-observer variation. So if you are not measuring the endometrium, it will always be better. And I always tell the pictures, have a picture clicked in a similar manner the way I'm showing, so that you can compare it, even if the different observers are performing this ultrasound. So let's come to clinical evidence. I know these are very small lines because I've taken directly, but I will read out that what is the evidence. This has all this evidence of today has been taken out from RBM Online, which was a very recent 2019 issue. And they are recommendations by the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. So they said the strong evidence is that endometrium should be measured transvaginally in the sagittal plane at the thickest portion near the fundus. Repeat any thin endometrium measurement, weak evidence, and patients undergoing ovarian stimulation with thin endometrium may be counseled. That effect on pregnancy rate is still unclear. So if we can recall that there are so many non-ART cycles where endometrium is thin and we just ignore that and we go ahead with treatment and patient comes pregnant. So endometrium is a very dynamic structure. It might be catching up later on, or even a endometrial thickness has the capacity to attach the embryo, and we have to keep in mind that not always every low endometrium will always bring a negative result. Now moving on to the next part, that how do we diagnose? If we have done the ultrasound, then hysteroscopic assessment is one of the gold standards, because you not only diagnose, but you also treat. Now, my piece of advice to everyone is that all those who are dealing with thin endometrium, you should have a complete operative equipment in hysteroscopy when you're dealing with such patients, because there is no point in entering the cavity and coming out without treating. So it will assess the Mullerian anomaly. You will demonstrate, you can see the synecdoche, fibrosis, endometritis, distortion, hypertrophy with infections. And now in chronic endometritis, 3 very important signs what you can look for are multiple hyperemic patches, micro polyps, and stromal edema. So what I would suggest is that in these patients, without sounding the cavity, and when you dilate the uterine cavity, dilate it very gently. Do not go beyond the internal wall so that you don't touch the endometrial cavity and fundus. And you can then put your hysteroscope as gently as possible without any trauma, so as to look at clinical signs of chronic endometritis. The next thing what people are also doing is hysteroscopy, which personally I don't have much experience, but it's very simple, that you do hysteroscopy and then you put a small amount of not a very diluted methylene blue, a proper methylene blue, and then you introduce a hysteroscope and you look at areas where more methylene blue has been taken over. So those areas which are darker than the other are the areas where you could find endometritis. So with the help of a grasping forceps, while the hysteroscope inside, so hysteroscopic grasping forceps, you can take a directed biopsy and send that for chronic endometritis to look for plasma cells. So this is what is an easy office-based test which you can do it, that while you're doing hysteroscopy, you can do a chromohysteroscopy. So now aim for treating thin endometrium. What is important is that number one, whatever you investigate and you find out, you categorize your patients into 2 categories. Have you found the offender? That means a patient you know has gone through a mid-trimester abortion followed by a very overzealous curettage, and suddenly she starts, menstrual abnormality. She gives you the history and you see that there is thin endometrium, and on 3D ultrasound, you see that there is an intrauterine adhesion. You have found the offender. So either if the offender is found, you can give a surgical treatment or a medical treatment. Now the problem comes is that in most of our cases, we are not able to find an offender. And so we start treating or directing our treatment towards maybe improving the blood flow, which can boost endometrial development, stimulate the endometrial cell colony growth by different things like GCSF, tamoxifen, HCG, PRP, stem cell therapy, or some alternative medicine. So let's look at what we can do in ovulatory cycles. As providers of natural estrogen, we know that endogenous estrogen is the best molecule for endometrial growth. Natural cycle can sometimes be a better option for endometrial development, especially in regularly ovulating women. So if we are looking at more in ART cycles or IVF cycles, if a woman is naturally ovulating, I would suggest that 2 cycles observe a natural cycle. So that's also very important. Suppose you've given an OC pill in the previous cycle. So her HPO axis is suppressed. Maybe in the next cycle, she may not ovulate. So do not give up. Go to the next cycle and call her on day 2, day 3, call her on day 10 or 11. Follow her follicle, and you will invariably see that these transient transient thin endometriums actually have recovered just by calling them in a natural cycle. So don't be an impression that if you have given estrogen to a woman and has shown thin endometrium, in the next cycle she will never form an endometrium. No, if she is ovulating, give her the chance in natural cycles. Just be patient and wait. In stimulated cycles with ovulation inductions, in case of oligo-ovulators, you can use tamoxifen, letrozole, or you can use low-dose gonadotropins. I use low-dose gonadotropins to prepare endometrium in most of my patients who are ovulating, who have shown thin endometrium, before an embryo transfer with oral HRT. I do change over. I like to give trial of 2 or 3 or 4 drugs before I can declare her that no, you are a girl who has resistant endometrium. So I would like to try all this. If they are non-ovulators, then you have no other options but to give, like premature ovarian failure, you will have to give estrogens. We are blessed with 2 molecules. One is oral estrogen. We can start with 1 or 2 milligrams and we can actually increase it to about 12 milligrams in a day. The dermal estrogen, you give up to 2 to 6 applications per day, which is 1.5 milligram in every application. And all other like conjugated equine estrogens, we do not use them. They are not appropriate for endometrial development. So we only have 2 molecules. Earlier, we used to have an injectable molecule, but we no longer have it. If you have, then please enlighten me, because I'm not aware that it is any longer available. It was called a Progynon depot earlier, 10 milligrams. So now coming to evidence. I'll read it out for you so that you don't have to get into this busy slide. So in ovarian stimulation treatment cycles, there is insufficient evidence to recommend changing the stimulation medication or a specific stimulation medication. This is very important because people think that in the middle of the cycle, if we change something, we will gain something. No, it's not true. In ovarian stimulation treatment cycles, there is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of adjuvants to improve endometrial thickness. It is also not true. So adding adding aspirin, adding vitamin E, adding estrogens during a follicular phase, no. Sometimes estrogens can act as a negative feedback because excessive estrogen in the will suppress your HPO axis. So please do not do it. Coming to IVF, in fresh embryo transfer cycles, patients should be counseled that endometrial thickness of less than 8 millimeter may have a negative impact on pregnancy and live birth rate. In fresh IVF ET cycles, patients with thin endometrium can be offered elective cryopreservation of embryos and transfer in a subsequent cycle. So this is the best what you can offer her, that right now your endometrium looks thin, let me investigate you, let me get back into your history. In the meantime, what we can do is that let's cryopreserve. So it's very important that your centers should have a very robust cryopreservation program with excellent survival of embryos and implantation rate. Otherwise, you would be, again, landing up with very poor pregnancy rates. So now if you have found the offender, hysteroscopy is the gold standard. If you have a large septum, yes, you can resect it, but most commonly is Sineke. You may have to resect. There have been cases where I had to do hysteroscopy 3 times. So do not be in the impression that only one hysteroscopy will be beneficial. Sometimes you may need second or even you may need third hysteroscopy, and you will see that some patients are benefited. If it's a total end organ damage, you can't help it. They will land up in surrogacy. So I remember 2 cases where in the first one, copper T, in fact, I have dealt with 2-3 cases where multi-load was broken. The doctor couldn't remove it. And for 3 years, it was lying inside the cavity and with the calcium deposit on it. And I had to remove it with the hysteroscopic resectoscope. The moment I removed it with the hysteroscopic resectoscope, I think the contraceptive effect was gone and the patient conceived within 2 cycles. And that is what was the problem was. In one case, I have removed a very old broken Carmen's cannula where the doctor knew that they had left during suction. They tried, without anesthesia 3 times in the OPD. Naturally, it would not have come out. It was lying transversely. After 3 years of lying there, it had completely, transformed into like a foreign body with calcium. So I had to remove it with the help of, again, resectoscope using the hook like a curate, and the patient conceived again. So it is very important that foreign bodies generally are also old retained products of conceptions which remain due to incomplete evacuations, and then they start affecting the endometrium and could also be causing endometritis. So they need to be treated and removed. Medical treatment, non-specific endometritis, the recommended is doxycycline 100 milligrams twice daily for 14 days or erythromycin 500 milligram TDS for about 2 weeks. If there is specific endometritis, which is tuberculosis, then of course you need anti-tubercular treatment. Give it for 6 months, not 9 months, not 12 months. Repeat hysteroscopy, take a biopsy, and clinically look at endometrial growth, which will start happening if the endometritis is treated and has not caused a permanent damage to the endometrium, which is the basalis. Now the question comes is when the offender is not found. So we get into the jargon, we start improving the blood flow to boost endometrial development. So we have these data supporting the use of low dose aspirin, saying that it can inhibit the release of vasoactive substances and thus prevents vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. Well, people are very fond of vaginal sildenafil, 225 milligram QID, glycerin trinitrate. Most of us don't give it, skin patches. They say that again, it will cause smooth muscular dilatation of the uterine blood vessels, pentoxifylline, and high dose of vitamin E. All have been tried to improve the possibility of uterine blood flow. But let's see what happens. I can share my clinical experience with pentoxifylline that sometimes it can give a lot of headache to the patients. They do not tolerate, and especially if you start giving aspirin with vaginal sildenafil, with L-arginine, with pentoxifylline, I think you are overloading the patients. Please do not, start shooting your arrows in all the directions. You will land up with a lot of pain to the patient, a lot of side effects with absolutely no increased benefit. So then, supporting my evidence, again, I will read it out for you. In patients with thin endometrium undergoing embryo transfer cycles, we suggest against the use of aspirin to improve pregnancy rate. In patients with thin endometrium undergoing fresh IVF ET cycles, we suggest against the use of luteal estrogen to improve pregnancy rate. And in patients with thin endometrium undergoing embryo transfer cycles, there is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of sildenafil to improve the pregnancy rate. So if you really are giving, please stick to one molecule, or it really doesn't matter because these endometriums possibly are not getting improved. If you ask me, frankly, yes, I sometimes give vitamin E capsules and aspirin, but nothing more than that. The other line where the world is moving on, we have seen the use of GCSF, HCG, PRP, tamoxifen, letrozole, alternative medicine. You have in the literature electric therapy, acupuncture, stem cell therapy. I will very little touch upon them because it is beyond the scope, of this presentation, or else it will take half a day. So when we are talking of platelet-rich plasma, it is an autologous blood plasma enriched with platelet, 4 to 5 times more than the circulating blood, more accessible. Whereas when we are talking of GCSF, it's a cytokine stimulating neutrophilic granulocyte differentiation and proliferation favoring endometrial growth. So PRP basically can, in short, stimulate growth factors, cytokines, IGF-1, interleukin-8, and endometrial GCSF can cause endometrial regeneration by mobilizing stem cells to the endometrial injury site and modulation of gene expression. So what you do in PRP, because people are keen to know, on day 10 of estrogen cycle, if you see that there is thin endometrium, 15 ml of venous blood is drawn in 5 ml of anticoagulant, which is ACDA. You centrifuge it at 200 gyrations. In our machines, it's roughly about 1500 revolutions per minute for 10 minutes. You will see 3 layers where RBC is at the bottom. The plasma and the buffy coat, the top layer, are collected and they are re-centrifuged at 500 gyrations for 10 minutes. And then the pellet is mixed with 1 ml supernatant, which contains the PRP. Now, the most ideal way would be that if you have a blood bank who can check the platelet concentration of this cryoprecipitate. It's very important because we are putting PRP, but we don't know how much times the platelet is increasing, and that is the place where this could be failing, or your choice of patient was not correct because it will not work at extremely resistant thin endometrium. So intrauterine instillation, now very recently I saw, last when I attended, where Dr. Shoki was showing that he's actually injecting PRP in the subendometrial region during hysteroscopy. Well, it is something which we cannot practice unless we are in a research setting and unless we have some trials. Now, GCSF, we know that Gleicher was the first who promoted it in 2013 by his pilot study, who showed that slow intrauterine perfusion on day of HCG and repeated on the day of OCR. And they had some evidence that endometrium was better. But if you see that his patients, if I critically analyze it, those were the patients who maybe might be having a transient refractory endometrium, or who had an endometrium which was just below 7. However, we need to differentiate patients who never cross an endometrium more than 5, and those patients who dwindle between 6 to 7, and possibly the outcome in these patients could be very different. So studies, we have multiple studies which now support the use of PRP. We also have which have supported GCSF, but the review by Kamath et al. In 2017 said after the pooled data, it did not support an increase in the endometrial thickness, however, a bit higher pregnancy rate. And so routinely using GCSF for every thin endometrium was not advised. We still have promising data with PRP. I think in future, after more robust data, we will be able to identify which will be the subset of patients who might be benefited with PRP. People have also mentioned transplanting. I'm just in the last few slides. Menstrual stromal cells along with PRP. Well, not much in the humans. Now coming to the evidence, every time I present something good and then I show the flip side to it, there is a weak evidence which says that patients with thin endometrium undergoing embryo transfer, we suggest against the use of intrauterine infusion of GCSF to improve pregnancy rate. The question with GCSF is that which should be better, subcutaneous or intrauterine? Is it really making any difference? And a subcutaneous use of GCSF can tremendously increase the leukocyte count, so you have to be even careful. So please do not incessantly hear and start giving a treatment. It is very important that you get into the literature, make up your own mind, have a research protocol, and then go about giving a new treatment and document it and take consent. It is very, very important. We are in medical legal world. In patients with thin endometrium undergoing embryo transfer cycle, we again suggest against the use of pentoxifylline, HCG, gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist, PRP or stem cell to improve pregnancy rate. However, this is a weak evidence. Only case reports and case series are in the literature with no controlled studies. So further research to evaluate the potential risk and benefits of these adjuvants is needed. Again, I'm saying whenever you give these adjuvants, please take a consent, tell them it's an off-label use, experimental, take consent of the possible side effects, and then you give it. Stem cell therapy, we had the first reported by Nagori in 2009. We have many methods which have come in, but just by putting any molecule in the endometrium and thinking that endometrium will regenerate is not correct. What is the most robust evidence right now is going into the vasculature, endometrial vessels, taking it from the bone marrow, harvesting it and putting the specific type of cells, and then expecting endometrial regeneration. The last is endometrial stem cells, which we cannot finish without just mentioning, so that you know that we have collagenic stem cells and reconstituted stem cells, and we are now quite ahead. This could be the way. Bone marrow derived stem cells, we know we have a lot of data on that, and subendometrial deposition of stem cell from the iliac crest. And the last, of course, is uterine transplantation. First reported in 2014, Putambekar's group has had a lot of work in it. The first live report first live birth reported from cadaveric uterine transplantation. So the advantage over surrogacy, of course, however, associated with medical challenges like vascular anastomosis, ischemic preservation, blood flow evaluation, immunosuppression, cost, ethical, social problems, and in countries where surrogacy is legalized, how much of uterine transplantation would be accepted, and of course the cost, and will our government take up to these projects is a question which needs to be answered. How does HCG act to improve thin endometrium? It modulates endometrial stromal cell receptivity to interleukin-1 during the implantation window, and IL-1 is the one which triggers angiogenesis. How do you do that? You can prime with a very small dose of HCG, priming from 7th or 8th day of estrogen in the proliferative phase in frozen ET cycles. This was Papineau-Collot, who in 2013 suggested, but we have very little data when it comes to HCG priming. We don't have urinary molecules which are that low dose. We had a pen coming from Merck Serono which had 600 units. Maybe that could be done, because how well will you dilute? Because the lowest dose which is available to us is 1500 units or 2000 units. So you will have to dilute it, and the rest of the drug you will have to throw. So it is just suggesting that the second study said that every third day in FET cycles, you can give a low dose HCG that is subcutaneous. Then we have some data which is suggesting tamoxifen for thin endometrium, which upregulates the expression of Ki-67 and in insulin-like growth factor 1. So, but this can only be done in patients who have the potential to ovulate. But patients, who cannot ovulate at all, like two categories, one is hypogonadotropic hypogonadism and premature ovarian insufficiency, then tamoxifen will not be helpful to them. This I have already talked about, autologous adult stem cell. We have alternative medicines. Well, how much can we give? As allopathic doctors, I don't think we can give these. Possibly Ayurvedic doctors can give. And so coming to the take-home message, that hysteroscopy is a must in persistent thin endometrium, even if virtual hysteroscopy by ultrasound shows normal cavity. Offender found, you treat appropriately. All drugs intending to increase blood flow or cause proliferation of the endometrial cells may be tried in desperate situations with uncertain outcome. Use of G-CSF still has many uncertain questions, though PRP seems more positive. At present, stem cell therapy may be only scientific way of regenerating atrophic endometrium. And the last is that thin endometrium, some facts may not even interfere with implantation if blood flows are favorable and synechia have been ruled out. The reported minimum thickness where pregnancy has been reported is 4.2 millimeter. And so I end at this, that when you are bald, I tell the patients that no matter how much you use any serum, cream, shampoo, it may not work. So some patients may need surrogacy at the end, but yes, unless you try putting some embryos, even in thin endometrium, do not declare that you cannot get pregnant unless you are dealing with grade 4 Asherman's. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations, Shweta. You have not left any stone unturned. I think this is the most comprehensive lecture I have, heard about thin endometrium. Congratulations to you once again.
Thank you so much.
I don't think so that I need to, add on to anything. She has given everything in the perspective. So thank you very much, Seema, and all the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Welcome, Savita ma'am. Savita ma'am is here. I can see her. Yes, welcome, ma'am. Over to you, Seema, now.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you for sparing your valuable time. Dr. Shweta, I must say this was the most relevant talk and we enjoyed it totally. And actually, there are very few questions we are left unanswered. But at the same time, literature, if we go into the depth, 50% are for and 50% are against. So before I invite Dr. Savita ma'am, I just have one important question. Yesterday I had a surrogate and on day 6 I was told that endometrium is good and it is 6 mm. It was triple layer what the scan was sent to me. And yesterday was day 10 when I did a scan. It was all irregular, inhomogeneous endometrium and it had very poor blood flow. So what could be the reason and what should we do for this patient? This was a 28-day cycle and she had a last child 3 years back only. And she was to be surrogate for a patient.
So I'm very clear that in surrogate, I will not take a chance with this kind of an endometrium. Right. And if suppose you are in paucity of surrogates, this can happen because the agency may not have, enough surrogates. So you can always follow back at a later date. I would ask you to go ahead, either I have many surrogates in my hand, so I will cancel it. I will not even think again. But if yes, she's very desperate, or if there's a desperate situation, then I would do a 3D ultrasound and maybe call her the next month, and I will just keep her as a standby. And then, if it's a surrogate, I don't think I'm in a
Hurry.
I don't want to over investigate her and compromise the results, so I will not.
No, but what could be the reason for her? Because that's
It could be endometritis. Maybe this girl landed up in PID in these years. So that could be the commonest cause, in these women.
okay. Thank you, Dr. Shweta. And Dr. Savita ma'am is here. Ma'am is a professor and unit head at Rohtak Medical College. And she has got many awards. And ma'am is the editor of many journals also. Can we have ma'am CV displayed here? And ma'am has special interest in adolescent pregnancy. And in last 20 years of association with madam, I can say one thing, that whenever we need her and we call her, she's always available. And we are really fortunate to have such seniors with us. Savita ma'am, if you have any questions for Dr. Shweta, or yes, she's the senior professor and unit head and master trainer for good scientific writing, and she's a member of editorial board and a reviewer for journals also. Glad ma'am you spared your valuable time. Welcome Savita ma'am, and over to you Savita ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Seema, for nice words for me. I just want to congratulate you for a very good attendance in this webinar. I could see more than 300% attending, and I congratulate Dr. Shweta for an excellent presentation. She has covered each and every, start from the basic things from estradiol, SCG, sildenafil, and the newest drug, the PRP, GCS. She has covered each and every aspect, and I never thought that this will be such a elaborative talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Only thing,
Kudos to
Shweta,
you.
I will love
Very
to,
well, and
yeah,
I'm very
I
happy
will
to
love
see
ask
Nymphia
you
here. Hello, Nymphia. She is from
Shweta.
my alma mater.
Good
I
evening,
think
ma'am.
Dr. Anita wanted to ask something.
Yeah, Dr. Neeta, yeah.
Dr. ma'am, you want to continue? Please continue. I'll ask later on.
No, yeah,
Dr.
that's
ma'am,
over. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. I
So I
just
think
wanted
most of the
to-
questions have been answered by Nymphia and others. So there are no more questions pending in this chat box.
Shweta,
Yeah.
endometrial
Only one question is
microbiota.
there.
Endometrial microbiome
Problem with
is
connection.
a new
Yes.
concept.
Yes.
So-
So chronic endometritis. Yeah.
So
So
what
chronic
is your
endometritis.
opinion regards that?
can we have all the mics mute?
Yeah, so so microbiota now it has also gone to the genomic level. Expensive tests cost about 30,000. So if you really want to go ahead, we are doing it. It is called Alice and Emma. One looks at the microbiome, one looks at the lactobacillus level in the endometrium. Yes, that's also I will reserve it only for those patients of RIS where I am not able to find any causes. So not in a normal population.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Shweta, I
Savita
have a
ma'am
few
had some
questions.
questions. No, Savita ma'am? Savita Singhal ma'am had some questions.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I think most of the questions have already been answered.
Between
Okay ma'am.
estradiol, valerate, and
Only one
hemihydrate
question is there,
to be used
Dr.
as
Shweta.
HRT.
Yes ma'am.
When to
Savita ma'am.
start giving estradiol valerate to thin endometrium in IUA, in IUI,
So, yeah,
what is
now
the dose and what is the duration? So only one question is left.
okay. I think Dr. Nymphia was asking about hemihydrate.
I just wanted to know, is there any difference between the usage?
I don't know.
What is
I
the preferred?
started lately, yes, using hemihydrate a lot other than the valerate. I think the mode of action is the same. It's the same. And in terms of even the competency, it's the same. I don't think one is more potent. But somehow the other, yes, I have shifted to hemihydrate also in many of my patients. But
Okay.
still,
Any indication of using estrogen support in luteal phase? Any indication? That's for the information.
so I think the only place where I give is an agonist triggered cycle where I have not given
Perfect.
an
Yeah,
HCG
that's right.
IVF.
Yes.
And I want an intensive luteal phase support. So I will give estrogen.
Yeah.
I will give a low dose of HCG on the day of oocyte retrieval, start estrogen along with progesterone. So that is my only indication.
So if we are giving an agonist trigger in an IUI cycle for any reason, supposedly many people give, Should they be adding estrogen in the luteal phase?
So no, I will not suggest that because they already have their endogenous LH. We have not suppressed it. So they will be having enough. So I don't see a reason of adding estrogen in those patients.
Any indication of adding estrogen ever in an IUI cycle?
I actually don't, because my concept is that suppose in a clomiphene cycle, if because of clomiphene the endometrium is thin, the clomiphene has already occupied the receptors in the endometrium and will take some time to displace it. So by giving a transient estrogen in the luteal phase or in the follicular phase, we won't be able to overcome this thin endometrium because the clomiphene is still stuck to the endometrial receptor. So it's better to give a washout period and then give it in the next cycle, another stimulation.
Dr. Seema, can you
Any
take one
comment
more
on-
questions? Yeah, one more question, Dr. Shweta. If we give the estrogen, is it going to affect the follicular development?
So, you know, see, when we give very high dose estrogen, see, let's say OC pills, what it does, it suppresses the ovulation because it suppresses your FSH and LH. So if you give high dose of estrogen, and this is what happens even in SRT cycles, when we start with 3 milligrams of, you know, estradiol valerian, it suppresses the natural ovulation. So by giving estrogen in the follicular, we are not helping the follicle further. So I would not estrogen at all.
Yeah, one more question
Yes.
from Dr. Lubna. Mr. Thakur is there.
The voice is cracking. I'm not able to hear.
Dr. Deepika, please look into it. Somebody is.
Can answer it. Yeah.
Dr. Mitra, please unmute yourself. Mute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there.
Yeah, now it's better.
Yeah. So one more question was there. There's some problem with chat box.
Yes, ma'am.
The ovulation induction cycle with clomiphene, what is good thickness of the endometrium? It is 8 millimeter at 14 days, or what else? What you say? What are your opinion?
Ovulation induction cycle, that is, I'm looking at clomiphene, letrozole, tamoxifen, or a gonadotropin cycle. This is what we are looking at in a non-IVF. When the follicle reaches about 17, 18 millimeter, an endometrium of 7 and above, I'm happy. I will not do any discussion with the patient if the endometrium is 7 and above.
7 is okay.
Yes, 7 is
I think we are all with the questions. No more questions are there.
So, ma'am,
Shweta, do we need to address subendometriotic cysts? At times we see
So,
subendometriotic
yes,
cysts.
subendometriotic cysts I've also seen. I think that in 2 cases they could be found. One is adenomyosis. They will show lesser implantation, and in cases of endometritis also they can have. So in the literature it has been said that if they are large subendometriotic cysts, they can hamper implantation, but I still don't know the answer how to treat them. How do you evacuate them, do what? So I think you can just prognosticate the patient.
Thank you, Savita ma'am.
Just one question. In non-IVF cycles, Shweta, how much importance do you place on thin endometrium?
So I give little importance unless it is 4 or 5 millimeter. So if it's a 4 or 5 millimeter and I'm doing an IUI, I may cancel the IUI just telling them do not increase the cost, but I do not dissuade them from natural conception. So I can give them an HCG and leave them. Or I can also ask them after 2 days to check an endometrium, but if the progesterone has come in, then it will make the endometrium thick, so we will never have a good correlation. But I will just note it in my file so that I know that this event happened and we can target it in the next cycle.
Yeah, so every cycle it may not be thin.
No, it may not be thin, yes.
That's what Dr. Shweta has already told also. Thank you, Dr.
What percentage of normal thickness of endometrium you get in association with endometrial tuberculosis, and how many patients means I want to know the clinical
Okay, I will tell you the clinical scenario
thin endometrium with endometrium.
Very clearly, I'll tell you most of the active tuberculosis, what we found, they had very thick and fluffy endometrium.
Yeah.
The moment we put in a hysteroscope, you saw an endometrium which looked like almost like how you see in a hyperplasia and with lot of shaggy looking thick endometrium. The second scenario, what you see in a tubercular endometritis is when already the stratum bassalis has been damaged and they have landed up with Asherman syndrome, tubular cavities, and thin endometrium. So you see two pictures.
Yeah, that is the thing I wanted to convey, that it's not that always endometrial tuberculosis will present with thin endometrium.
No, it presents with thick endometrium. They have these cystic areas. You put hysteroscope, you actually feel as if you're dealing with some endometrial carcinoma, and the histopathology comes as granulomatous inflammation.
A picture may be very varied.
That gets treated very well, and they do very well. It is only that stage 4 Ashermans when they have reached where nothing can be done.
Thank you. I think Dr. Mitra was here.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta, and thank you, Savita ma'am. And now we proceed to panel. And I think most of the questions are there in the panel also.
Okay.
And if anything, anybody can add, we will welcome the idea. So I invite the panelists. First, we have Dr. Nymphia. Can we have the slide share of Dr. Nymphia? Deepika ji? Dr. Nymphia is senior consultant and IVF specialist at Shalimar Hospital, Max Shalimar, and she's the editor of journal also, IFS journal, and she's the executive member of IFS. And Dr. Nymphia is one person who has contributed significantly to IFS, and there is no program which is complete without Dr. Nymphia Valecha's contribution. She is consultant in charge for Stage IVF Shalimar and executive member IFS, co-convener of SIG IFS. She has special awards and achievements, silver medal for presentation, post-ART pregnancy outcomes, and Abdul Kalam Award for excellence. Welcome, Dr. Nymphia. Happy to have you here, and I'm sure we are going to be better versed with your presence here. And we have Dr. Nisha Singhal here. Dr. Nisha Singhal is head of the department at Manesar Medeor Hospital, and her special field of interest is endoscopy and IVF. And we have Dr. Manju. Can we have the slides change for our panelists, Dr. Deepika? Dr. Deepika, yes. Dr. Manju Chandani, welcome ma'am. She has 30 years experience in gynae practice. She's trained in advanced laparoscopy at Dr. Sheila Mehra's endoscopy team. And she has published articles, organized workshops, and she will contribute significantly to the discussion. Welcome, Dr. Manju. And most of the questions that we have here are answered, but to have more discussion and going into depth, the chance which we don't get normally in all the conferences because of shortage of time. And we have experts, Dr. Shweta, Dr. Nymphia, Dr. Manju, and Dr. Nisha. Maybe she's not joined. So we will start with the questions, ma'am. Dr. Deepika, can we have the first question? First question will be to Dr. Nymphia, and again it's a repetition. So we just want to draw a consensus on minimum. We have talked about the minimum. We will talk about maximum also. So what is your say on minimum endometrial thickness for pregnancy, Dr. Nymphia?
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, you're visible. Yes, Dr. Nymphia.
7.5 mm.
That is. So that is minimum. If it is less than that, then at least for IVF cycles, we won't do. That's what you want to say. Yeah, because as Dr. Shweta has mentioned that less than that also, because literature quotes that 4.2 mm is the minimum endometrium where we can go. So Dr. Shweta, Dr. Shweta, what is your say on the minimum?
So, if it's a primary embryo transfer, I would not like to do below 7.5. But if I'm dealing with a patient where I know that in last 6 months, she never grew her endometrium with whatever treatment I did. So I've just done an embryo transfer day before where the endometrium had reached 6.8 in a gonadotropin cycle, but she's the one for last 6 months, she's not showing. So I did a transfer. So this is how I would go. But yes, primary embryo transfer, we want a better endometrium.
So this question why I kept, because I had a patient and she was 32 years old. married for last 8 years. She came for IVF, but in spite of all what we have discussed, we could not improve her endometrium. So it was around 5.2, and going by the literature, we did a transfer also, but unfortunately, she did not conceive.
I
So
had
we,
a patient who had twin pregnancy, a patient of mine with 5.4 endometrium. She would never grow it more than that.
because
But
she
the
was your
chances would
patient.
be less. Yeah, the chances would be less.
She was Dr. Shweta's patient, that's why. So we can have the second question. Dr. Manju, is there any maximum thickness also beyond which we should not proceed, or sometimes 18 mm, 20 mm irregular sort of endometrium? So like we talked to Dr. Shweta about the surrogate, that we should not proceed, but otherwise in the normal cycle patient has come, we have given some Clofert or whatever, the Latazole or the gonadotropins, and what is the maximum thickness that we expect?
Actually, the cutoff has not been defined, but usually it has been seen that more than 14 to 15 mm, the success outcome is low. So 14 or 15 should be the cutoff.
Dr. Shweta?
Yeah, I would also agree on that because beyond 14, I am also, uncomfortable transferring. And in cryo-ET cycles, if my patient suddenly after say 8 days or 9 days of estrogen shows an endometrium which is like this, I may even, cancel that. But yeah, if you have no other choice, patient is from other city, then I would transfer, but not beyond 14 for sure.
And IUI if you have to do, and she comes with this picture, hyperplastic endometrium.
So, it's very important to see a baseline endometrium. That is why that we are not dealing with patients of endometrial hyperplasia. So go back and see her day 3 or day 4 endometrium. And if you have not checked that, then in the next cycle, make a note in your paper, and in the next cycle, do check it so that you know that you are not ruling out missing on a hyperplasia. So that cycle I may do it. I may do, yeah. I may do IUI because I'm not, spending so much of money of the patient that time.
Very true.
Dr. Seema, very important message here is that we at times in our OPDs randomly start IUI cycles. A baseline day 2, day 3 scan is very important.
Okay. So the next question, can we have the next question? See, this was the question. We were discussing in the previous meeting on IUI that if there is good follicle, there will be good endometrium. But I don't agree with the statement, because so many times we see good follicle. Like this patient who I'm talking about had poor endometrium. She had good follicle. She made good embryos also. So how do we explain this, Dr. Nymphia?
A good follicle and a poor endometrium in an IUI cycle or in a regular ovulation induction can just be because of your clomiphene, estrogen suppression can be there. And otherwise, Dr. Shweta had covered this topic in a lot of detail that with very
Dr.
good
Shweta
follicles,
said that,
you have to do
okay, complete, yes.
So like if you're talking just about regular IUI cycles or regular ovulation induction cycles, we have to see what drug we have given. At times, a clomiphene cycle with a very good follicle will give us a bad endometrium. We need a washout period for the clomiphene, or if it doesn't happen, then you change your drug. Give her letrozole or add gonadotropins. If we are seeing that in an IVF cycle, there are good follicles and the endometrium is not growing in spite of a good E2, rule out other causes of thin endometrium, endometritis, adhesions, and whatever Dr. Shweta has explained in detail.
Like Dr. Shweta had said that in between cycle, if we give anything to improve endometrium, that doesn't help.
It doesn't
But
help. It doesn't help.
normally this is what we practice, day 6, day 7, also we start estrogen, we start anything, sildenafil, anything.
Estrogen will not help, yeah.
Like we be desperate and we see good endometrium, though not pregnancy there.
Dr. Seema, what you do in the next 10 patients, believe me, don't give this. And you wait for the follicle to reach 18 or 20 milliliter.
Yes.
If you really think that that patient didn't find, and when you say poor endometrium, there are two aspects. One is thickness. You're looking at thickness but triple line. One is you're looking at low thickness and non-triple line. The third you're looking at is good thickness but hyperechoic. 3 aspects to poor endometrium. I call 3 endometriums poor. So I would say an endometrium which is a bit suboptimal, like 6 with triple line, will bring the same pregnancy rate. endometrium which is say 5 and is also hyperechoic is the worst scenario, and endometrium which is say 8 and a bit hyperechoic is the second in line. So it depends what we are looking at in that particular cycle. Also look at that the follicle has not started luteinization, because there could be a premature progesterone rise and which could be making your endometrium look a bit hyperechoic. So look at the posterior wall of the endometrium, and if you see echoic echogenicity, you know that progesterone has come, you can do a serum progesterone level. So I would say, rather than a dictum that you have poor endometrium, first find out that we are not dealing with refractory thin endometrium, because refractory thin endometriums get corrected.
Very right. Thank you, Dr. Shweta. Next question to Dr. Manju. This is a simple question, but I want more elaboration in this. Is there any correlation of age with the endometrium, that this particular age we can go with this endometrium, or Dr. Manju?
Actually, there's not much correlation of age with the endometrium. It's more, with the ovaries, the ovarian reserve, the age affects that. But usually it has been seen in various studies, they've quoted that after the age of 35, maybe the endometrium thickness reduces. After 35, some studies quote that after 40, the endometrial quality may decline. But as such, the correlation of age with endometrium is not very clear cut.
Thank you, Dr. Manju. Dr. Shweta?
So, yeah, that's true, because see, even you can make a 50-year-old lady pregnant with donor eggs and just give her HRT. Some uterine senescence happens. But I think you see more of endometrial issues in women who have had premature menopause. Say she stopped at the age of 40 and she comes to you at 43 or 44 without taking any HRT in between. So maybe those are the patients where you might have a bit of a problem in regrowing the endometrium. But by and large, at any age, you will be able to make it a good endometrium. It may take longer time for some and a shorter time for some.
Because endometrium is a recurring thing, na? Every cycle it is, growing again and again. So it will not depend much on age. It is, the hormonal profile of the patient, which
as long as the patient is menstruating,
yes,
the endometrium will shed and grow.
Yes.
So as such, there's no correlation of age.
Very true. So next question is to Dr. Manju. Estrogen replacement we have discussed, but some contradiction here. Estrogen supplement, how much is the maximum dose? And there was a question also that Dr. Savita was asking, that for IUI, up to what maximum dose of estrogen you can give, and up to how long to continue. And this question is to Dr. Manju.
Estrogen supplement, normally the maximum dose can go up to 6 to 8 to 10 milligrams, as Shweta has already elaborated. But in our practice, I'm not an IVF specialist. I do only up to IUI. So normally, if I have to supplement estrogen, I will give 2 to 4 milligram daily from 5th day of the period till the 25th day. And for IVF, it will be different. I think Dr. Nymphia can answer that better.
Dr. Nymphia?
In an HRT cycle, we go maximum to 12 milligram.
Dr. Shweta, actually, when we were doing IVF with Dr. Gautam Alabadia Center, we were giving very, very high doses and patients were conceiving. But literature everywhere contradicts.
I'll tell you, Dr. Seema, the way to it is, if at all you have to decide, check an E2 level. If the E2 level after a week of stimulation is about 200, there is
no need.
And still your endometrium is growing, then what are we going to achieve after keep on adding oral estrogen? Suppose if the estrogen, the blood levels in the estrogen are not appropriate with a high dose such as 12, try changing the mood. Add some transdermal estrogen. Maybe the bioavailability of an oral estrogen is not that much. So just check your E2 levels. If they are appropriate, there's no fun adding more estrogen.
And just one more question, Dr. Nithya, what are the side effects that you have come across? Because we have seen practically all side effects which have been mentioned in the textbooks. So what is your experience with the side effects of estradiol, especially the elderly patients, 50 and around?
50 and around, generally my cutoff for taking a patient for IVF is 45. So I'm
Okay.
very wary of taking elderlies because I think they're very high risk patients, especially when hormonal therapies is to be given. Our patients are generally tolerated estrogen well because it never go beyond 12. Not much experience,
One
Dr. Shweta.
question. Yeah, do we have to measure E2 in all the patients with IVF or?
I mean, it's a good idea that you measure after 1 week so that you know that the appropriate absorption is there. They're having such an expensive cycle. So an E2 level gives us a fair idea. Because we are very sure that the endometrium is refractory or the E2 levels in the body are not appropriate. Do we need to add some transdermal estrogen? So that's the only
Is it
thing.
better to measure E2 levels in all the patients?
Better.
Better to measure. So
Dr.
that
Shweta,
can
what do you
decide
do in
the
your
dosage.
practice? She can
Yeah.
add on.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
These
So
5.
nowadays I'm not doing estrogen levels in my HRT cycle, and I agree. I give a small explanation. It's like iron tablet. If your patient is anemic, you can give 2 and 3 tablets also. But do you think it will get absorbed by the body? It will not. So the moment body reaches the saturation level, it starts excreting. The same is with estrogen. There is an upper ceiling effect of estrogen. If you give beyond it, if you are just excreting it from the body and you are increasing the side effects, gastritis is a very severe side effect. So I would rather add a transdermal estrogen, give another molecule,
Yeah.
have another way to absorb, and I don't go beyond 12 milligrams.
So one more question, Dr. Shweta. This is how long to continue? One, when patient is like we had a patient with the she will not menstruate without high doses of estrogen, and for 6 months continuously I kept on giving. She had a very small cavity on hysteroscopy, but ultimately she did conceive and she did had a female child. So if we are giving estrogen to a patient for IVF or say otherwise also, so what is the maximum duration that we can give her estrogen? Number one, and if she gets pregnant because I read, 80 days, up to 80 days, some are saying some other days. So two questions you have to answer. What is the maximum dose you discussed? How long can we give to a patient before going for the IVF cycle?
So in one given cycle, when I'm preparing endometrium for embryo transfer, I generally give it for 3 weeks. I've extended it to 25, 28 days also. If she doesn't form endometrium, then I cancel it and I go to the next cycle. The
So
second, yeah.
how many months do you give for waiting for the endometrium to grow? Maximum.
HRTs can be given for years. If you have, now there is another one, like I got a patient today, 43 years old. I will get a mammography done. I would get the screening done. That's very important before I start HRT for these women. Number two is HRTs can be given, like our hypogonadotropic hypogonadic women are on HRTs or POF are on HRTs. They can also take it for 6 months, provided you have done the adequate screening. Number two, what was the second question you asked me? That
If she gets pregnant and we have given her estrogen, how long do we continue?
so believe me that I am stopping it after 9 weeks of pregnancy. And in all my HRT agonadal cycles, I am stopping after 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy. I do not continue beyond that. So whatever you can calculate. So yeah, that comes to around 60 days.
60 days, yes. So that's okay. I think that's perfect. So we have next
Usually
question
stop
to
after
Dr.
the cardiac activity, 6 weeks.
till cardiac activity. No less also.
Yeah, yeah.
So next question is to Dr. Manju. This we have discussed. Actually, this is not a question, very good question, but any food supplements, because patients come and ask what any food supplements anybody here is trying to improve the endometrium, because when we get desperate in spite of everything, patients come and suggest, like I have a friend who is doing Ayurveda, Patanjali with Baba Ramdev, and she tells me that there are products which improve. So I want to know if anybody has some experience with those food products, though we cannot prescribe. Dr. Nimfia and Dr. Manju.
No idea.
I'm not aware of
No
any food
idea.
supplements which improve the
So,
endometrium.
soya bean can be given. It has estrogenic.
It's estrogen.
So you
No
can have
bottle.
soya bean products.
One of
Baba
my
Ramdev
patients
is
told
not
me
watching. He
that
will get a business idea out of this. Hope he's not watching.
hope he's not watching.
And same question again. I think this is for everyone. Like massage and all. Next question is any natural means, like in I was reading whole
Yeah,
literature
that's
that
what
improving
I
physical
wanted to
activity.
mention, that one of my patients had told me she had a refractory endometrium for 2 months and suddenly the third month the endometrium was very good. She said that one of our friends told her that you're supposed to do Manduk Asana. There's a Manduk Asana in yoga She said, I've been practicing this for a week, and she had a remarkably good endometrium. So whenever patients ask me for an exercise, I tell them this is, anyways, it's just exercise.
Can we have a demo?
Anyways, any kind of.
Dr. Nymphia?
I usually advise my patients exercise because I think it increases the pelvic blood flow.
Yes.
And it can
Yes.
So
yes.
being
And I
active-
didn't deny it. Yes. I tell my patients because in any case, it's an exercise. What's the harm in doing it? So
it is good for
Mandu
patients to
Kasan.
exercise.
Yeah.
We have Dr. Nisha also here. Nisha, next question is to Dr. Nisha Agarwal. This is next question. Role of Dr. Shweta has discussed in detail, but just to have your words, role of stem cells in improving poor endometrium or intrauterine synechia. Dr. Nisha, Deepika ji, Dr. Nisha.
She was here.
I think she has left, I think.
No, I just got a message that she's there.
She's there, but probably her internet connectivity is having some problem.
Okay, so this Dr. Manju, you can answer this question.
I think this role of stem cells actually is in the experimental and research phase. So whatever I think Shweta has already said about it, that no clear-cut guidelines are there. So it is in the experimental stage. We'll come to know in future how it helps. Because stem cells are being used in all no-hope disorders. So this is one of them.
Anybody in India is doing, Dr. Nymphia, you tell me?
Yes, people are being experiment. Like, of course, some people do it, but we are not very sure about the definite results as such.
Dr. Shweta?
Unmute, ma'am.
Dr.
I think we need more robust data coming from different centers. I'm yet to see a good published data from Indian centers. So a lot of people are saying that they are doing it, but I am yet to see data.
Okay. So stem cell is experimental, but I really see some future in stem cells, and I hope, Dr. Shweta, you start doing it, and then, we can send patients to you.
I think in Gangaham it will be very difficult because our ethical committee getting, approval.
That is the beauty. We can do it, but we don't have that working force, and you can do it, but you don't get the clearance. So just more one thing I want to discuss is, Dr. Nymphia, you tell me, we have talked about GCSF. So Dr. Shweta has already covered actually intrauterine or parenteral, but I want to know which is better, number one, and what is the dose?
Intrauterine.
And 3 questions. What is the dose and which is better, and can we give in combination?
In combination too?
Means parenteral as well as local intrauterine.
So, whatever we have used is just an intrauterine installation.
Okay, Dr. Shweta?
Refractory endometriums, at times we give on day 7 and 8, and then again on the day of trigger. And sometimes in previous failures, we give it just for an immunological boost on the day of the trigger.
How are the results?
Day of starting progesterone.
How are the results? Because personally, I feel there are no results. I gave for 10 patients in a series and 0 results. So what is your experience?
I am happy.
Happy? Okay, Dr. Shweta.
My fellow had a thesis and...
I used it in few patients earlier, never saw a growth in endometrium because maybe they were those very, very tough in endometriums, permanent. So I gave up on that.
So what is your take? Which should be subcutaneous or intrauterine? Which route is better?
I will not recommend either.
Either.
But if somebody has to use, then maybe intrauterine. I think it's very important that we have some kind of data. If we have, then it will be much better.
There are data, but they have very less number of patients, like 25 patients. It was done.
Support the use of GCSF for thin endometrium.
So we don't discuss in details about this again. Okay, now next question to Dr. Manju. Nisha, are you able to connect? Dr. Nisha? She's not there. So Dr. Manju, next question to you. We are talking a lot about endometrium scratching, ERA test. So first I would like to know about the ERA test. How does it really help What is the sensitivity and specificity? Dr. Manju?
I think the IVF specialists will be better persons to elaborate on that, because I have personally not advised any ERA test for any patients, because I think the IVF people will be able to elaborate. It is basically a molecular diagnostic test used to assess the endometrial receptivity and just to find out the implantation window. But I think Nymphia will be a better person to elaborate on that. Are you using ERA or not?
Dr. Nymphia?
Yeah. Yes, we are using ERA.
In
Dr.
the
Shweta?
IVF patients.
In multiple failures, whenever there are previous failures and we are not able to explain in any other way with a good endometrium, with a good embryo, so we suggest an ERA for the patient.
Nymphia, what is
Dr.
the
Shweta has a huge
reproducibility in,
data with ERA.
Yes,
what is
yes.
the reproducibility in next cycle? Nymphia, I just want to ask you this. So that is a big question mark over there, no?
So, you know,
That's true.
sharing the experience with ERA, basically what is very important is to know that when you are dealing with recurrent implantation failures,
Hello.
are we dealing with poor embryos or no? Because most of the places in India, you will never get the correct report. If you are dealing with IVF failures of your own centers where you are sure about blastocyst transfers, not just cleavage, and after about 3 embryo transfers, if they fail to implant in a normally looking endometrium, then ERA can have a role. But ERA will have more role, I think, in post-receptive endometrium, where it is saying that when you give 5 days of progesterone, the window of implantation already closes. Maybe in pre-receptive, and your question to answer. So this question was asked to the lab who are performing, and they said the reproducibility is for about 1 year. But yes, this is a question. Those who do not favor ERA have this question that how it is reproducible in the next cycle. Those who are not proponents of ERA say that after all it is dating. No, it is at a molecular level and it's showing gene expression. Those who are in favor will find an indication to do it in a very limited population in a guarded way. Those who are not proponents will find all the indications not to do it. But yes, we need much more data, much more acceptability in data, because it is expensive.
So yes, what is your take on that? Because cost is the main concern, and if
Corrected, I would say if you have corrected the genetic part of the embryos and you know that you are dealing with normal embryos, then your cause of RIF will be limited. If you have ruled out other causes, then there is a role of ERA testing, but it is not for all thin endometriums.
okay, Dr. Nymphia, HRT is recommended for frozen embryos or for all cases. I think we've discussed just this is next question.
All
This we've
cases.
discussed. Dr. Nymphia, okay. What are the various grading of endometrium? Dr. Shweta discussed it, but just to elaborate once again that what are the various, we have 3 types, no? A, B, C type of endometrium. So what are they, Dr. Nymphia? Can you just elaborate on the points again? Dr. Shweta, you can tell us once again. I just read ABC.
So basically 3 types clinically. One is hypoechoic, which is your trilaminar, which just shows a better vascularity to the endometrium. The second is isoechoic. Isoechoic means where the echogenicity is the same as the myometrium. And third is hyperechoic, where the echogenicity is more than that of the myometrium. So basically, typically you will see either in a progesterone phase of the endometrium, which is physiological, or second is endometritis. So the best in terms of pattern, we correlated to hypoechoic, which is trilaminar pattern.
So in adenomyosis, what will be the endometrium like?
So in adenomyosis, you will have a bit of a crenated margins of the endometrium. It may be a little irregular. It could be hyperechoic or isoechoic. And there would be a loss of the transitional zone between the endometrium and the myometrium. So this is what you can typically see in adenomyotic uteruses. And sometimes you see, because these uteruses are so big that it is posteriorly displaced and it is very long cavity.
So what treatment do you recommend in patients with adenomyosis?
It depends. If it's more than 5 centimeters, sometimes I may recommend them an adenomyoma resection. It's easy to say, very difficult to perform because you're dealing with dense pelvic adhesions also. Or these are the cases where a prolonged GnRH agonist therapy can be given, which is called prolonged downregulation, which is medically managing endometriosis followed by a frozen embryo transfer.
So what is your experience? How many patients you have come across of adenomyosis and treated?
Because adenomyosis very commonly, so I would not treat a 2 to 3 centimeter adenomyoma, but yes, if it is a large, I just delivered a baby just 2 months back. She had a huge adenomyoma and she made it. So some patients with adenomyosis will benefit from medical therapy, some may benefit from surgical resection, and there is one subset where the uterus, if it is more than 14 weeks, they have very, very poor implantation and even may need surrogacy.
Okay, so surrogacy makes the indication for adenomyosis also.
It's
And
very
next question is to you only, Dr. Shweta. What are the various, you have talked about some, what are the various parameters when we are going for assessment? One is that we see on color Doppler, and what are the other things that
what I
everybody
look
can?
at, there is theoretically a lot of things done. I look
Yes.
at a baseline endometrium, which is just a thin endometrium, which should be less than 5 millimeter. I look at the pattern of growth. So an endometrium typically grows at 1 to 2 millimeters per day. So at the end of the cycle, when the follicle is about 17 millimeter and above, I look at a triple line and I look at whether it is hypoechoic or hyperechoic. I do not do blood flow studies routinely in non-IVF cycles. I don't think we should increase the cost. I do not look at endometrial volumes. I do not look at the RIPI of uterine vessels. I'm not doing anything like this. I don't think it is necessary. We just did a study of our fellow comparing subendometrial blood flows with no blood flows in frozen embryo transfer cycles, and we found absolutely no difference in the pregnancy rate.
Very true and very well explained, and very honestly also, because there are at times, webinars and conferences whole day on endometrial factors. So that is why I wanted you to elaborate and tell us what is the right thing to do. Thank you, Dr. Shweta. And next question I will ask Dr. Both. First, Dr. Nymphia. Even today, many patients request DNC, and some get it done also, and they are benefited also. So what is your say on that?
So
Only
as the theoretical benefit of DNC might be related to endometrial scratching, what we talk about these days, that it
Yes.
creates some inflammatory response, and the DNC is a big no-no. For you don't need a DNC except you have to in any female patient you need a DNC only when you need to do a targeted biopsy. For everything we have an office biopsy these days, if at all otherwise also indicated. For an infertility, it's a big no.
Thank you, Dr. Nifia. Dr. Shweta,
So
tell us
only and
about.
only, yeah.
Okay, we'll finish. Complete.
As per our guidelines, I try managing them medically. If you're talking about DNC, general DNC for infertility. I
General
don't do
DNC,
it
then
in,
I want you to elaborate on scratching also.
I don't do it even in one patient unless I see I'm suspecting a hyperplasia. I have these Rampipillas, or what we call Probet, which are OPD based endometrial catheters for biopsy. They're plastic cannulas, very thin. You call them Probet or Rampipilla. And so if I am suspecting a hyperplasia, I would either do a hysteroscopy and take a directed biopsy, or I do an OPD based biopsy with the help of those cannulas. I don't do a routine DNC. I'm not looking at tuberculosis. This is the bottom line. I'm not looking at tuberculosis. Infertility is not equal to tuberculosis.
Okay, but endometrial scratching has been talked about so much, and we have so many.
So we have the PIP study, which completely says that you don't need endometrial scratching to improve the pregnancy rates.
Okay, I think we go with this because that is the right
role in RIF, which has been mentioned, but it does not promote, and definitely let's not mix IVF to non-IVF patients.
Right. Okay, thank you. So last question is to Dr. Manju. We give ATT to patients, and I'm really confused. Does it really heal endometrium? Because I have seen most of the patients, we finish the treatment 9 months, they conceive, and before that they were having poor endometrium. They don't even come for follow-up, but they just come pregnant. So does anti-tubercular drug help in healing the endometrium also? And if yes, what is the mechanism? Dr. Manju?
Please unmute, Manju.
I want Savita ma'am also to answer this question after Dr. Manju. Yes.
Yeah, anti-tubercular treatment will heal tuberculosis anywhere in the body, and the healing mechanism is by fibrosis. So if you diagnose it at an early stage, then definitely it will help in a successful pregnancy outcome. But if it is already damaged and it's in an advanced stage, then it will heal by fibrosis and adhesions. Then whatever you may do, it will not result in a successful pregnancy outcome. But definitely anti-tubercular treatment heals tuberculosis wherever in the body.
Thank you, Dr. Manju. Savita ma'am, you're there, Dr. Savita, because we get lots
I
of.
am. Yeah, I
Ma'am,
am
please
here.
share
But,
your experience with patients.
yeah, in my experience also, you see so many patients come conceive after completing the ATT. That there might be any, so it might be that due to improvement in the endometrium itself, they conceive. Definitely they come with the pregnancy after so many patients. We complete the ATT, especially these are those patients who are not amenorrheic, completely amenorrheic. If patient completely amenorrheic before start of treatment, I doubt that they may not conceive. But if only oligomenorrhea is there, then definitely they conceive. The reason might be improvement there. And I want to just add on about the DNC in this. We're not using DNC even in gynae patient now. It is almost obsolete. We're just using endometrial aspiration or just endometrial sampling. So curate word is not used nowadays, even in obstetrics or in gynae anyway. Scratching is the option that can be done. So,
Ma'am, how long are you giving ATT in medical college to
we're
infertile
giving for
patients?
9 months. We're giving for 9 months.
9 months, ma'am.
Yeah,
Right, ma'am.
not for 6 months. Though some of the guidelines say it can be given for 6 months, but we are continuing for 9 months in our patients.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for
Sometimes
sharing.
we get good response because all ATT are good antibiotics. It may not be tuberculosis only, but it may be some other chronic endometritis which has got healed because of use of this antibiotic use. You know, they are
But
all.
Anita, we are not giving, we in our college are giving only proved endometrium and tuberculosis.
That is the
We're
protocol,
not giving
ma'am.
empirical in any patient. I don't recommend that it should be given empirically to any patient. It is not good to give empirically.
So, Anita ma'am, how many patients are you getting of tubercular and infertility patients?
Actually, I'm in a public sector hospital. We get it often, as Dr. Savita ma'am has already highlighted. So it is very frequently seen in our patients of infertility because we are catering to that population.
So, Dr. Shweta.
Still, we are getting granulomas on histopathology. So some of the patients.
All type of patients we are getting.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much
Even
for sharing.
last month, one patient, 3 months back, one patient with AFP was positive. It was very surprising in my life. It's all the first time.
Yeah. So rarely
AFP was positive. Yeah.
we
So
need
we are
to
still getting in medical college these patients. Might be 1 or 2 patients per month, not more than that, but we are getting.
Must present that case, ma'am, in the journal.
Yeah.
I treat tuberculosis at 3 places. One, I've done laparoscopy, I see caseation. Even if histopath is negative, I will give the treatment. Though it does not come, but it will. I will give. Number 2, if AFB is positive, if my histopath is positive or my culture is positive, AFB. These are the 4 tests which I do. If any one of them is positive, I will give ATT.
We have stopped doing PCR. PCR in the endometrium, we've absolutely stopped.
But flimsy findings on laparoscopy, like few like Walther cell nest being reported as caseation, that is incorrect. You will have clear-cut stigma where either the peritoneum is flooded or you will have large TO masses. We need to distinguish tubercular from non-tubercular because I think it's a large treatment we are giving to the patient. It is a notifiable disease. We cannot give it. We cannot give it so easily just because they are infertility.
We started actually a little early. Thank you, Dr. Shweta. It was the most relevant and most needed lecture, and hopefully we're going to have many more. And before I call the most important person to give vote of thanks, I request all who are attending this program to vote and support Dr. Mitra Saxena, who is contesting for Obstetric Emergency Committee, and Dr. Anita ma'am, who is contesting for Food and Drug Committee. Thank you, Dr. Shweta, for being with us.
And for you. I'm saying all the votes for you.
Your vote is very precious, but I request Dr. Shweta to be with us more often. This is 7 days program, but we can extend when scholars like you are there. You know, it's such a ready feast for us, you know, to have all the answers and the person we can trust. Actually, people talk a lot, but do little, and I trust them. No, at all. So you are one person who can be trusted blindly, who shares all her research, all her work, and it really helps us. And we are looking forward to many more such webinars. And Dr. Nitya, definitely, she is the most wonderful and most dynamic person in IFS I have met, and definitely impressive personality also whom I like. And Dr. Anita ma'am and Dr. Savita Singhal ma'am, I know your time was very, very precious, but you still gave us the time, and Dr. Manju. And now I request Dr. Mitra Saxena to give vote of thanks to everybody, and special thanks to Dr. Deepika for arranging everything so beautifully. Mitra Di, are you there?
Yeah, Dr. Seema, Dr. Mitra is a little busy in another webinar. She just
And
rang me up, so
okay,
she will not be able to join. So you just continue.
so we can have a flyer here, Deepika ji. We can just.
So thank you everybody for giving me this opportunity to come and interact with you all, lovely people. Thank you so much, Seema. Thank you, Deepika, and thank you, Savita ma'am, for being there for us always. Thank you so much, Manju and other learned co-panelists, Nymphia, and Shweta is too good as usual.
Beyond.
So thank you, thank you.
Me, I
I also
invite
like
people
to
from
thank
Jackson.
Dr. Seema, Dr. Shweta, everyone. It was an excellent presentation by all, excellent discussions, especially the high type of things, GSK, GSF, and PRP. So I just thank Dr. Seema and her team, Jackson Pal,
Yes, Dr.
for
Mitra
giving me the
Saxena, we request
opportunity.
you vote and support our candidate from Rewari. So Rewari is known by Dr. Mitra Saxena, and everybody must support. And Dr. Deepika, may I request Jackson Pal people to say a few words about the program? And
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to connect with all of you. I'd like to take this opportunity to let you know that on behalf of Jackson Pal, the makers of Endonorm TV2 and Lycored Preg Sachet in orange flavor for good pregnancy outcomes, I am Dr. Deepika Chabra. Along with me, my teammates, Dr. Vipin and Mr. Amit Saxena, all of us thanking all the experts for sharing such immense knowledge with us today. And special thanks to all the attendees. We hope to go a long way with your support in sharing the knowledge with all of you. Till the next webinar, it's bye from all of us. The next webinar is going to be tomorrow, which is also an initiative led by Dr. Seema Mittal. It's Rewari initiative. Vipin, if you can.
yes, everybody must attend that. It is very good because
Free opening. Vipin, can you please change the slide?
because as parents, we really want our children to go to school, so that we get some time, me time also, and time for our activities also.
Yeah, so we hope to see you at 3 p.m. tomorrow. A very important topic which concerns all of us. Initiative of Dr. Seema Mittal again, along with the Doctors for Society initiative. The district commissioner is going to be here from Rewari. Ma'am would be able to tell us more. Do join us tomorrow. Schools reopening, stakeholders dilemma, and this. Thank you so much and look forward to
Thank you to all organizers.